Good. Good afternoon. It's Monday, the 12th of November 2018, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Mike Robinson. Joining me in the studio today, as usual on Monday, Patrick Henningsen. Welcome to the programme, Patrick.
Great to be with you, Mike.
We're going to get straight on here with EU military unification. Now, we mentioned last week that Emmanuel Macron, the French president, had this to say: we have to protect ourselves with regard to China, Russia, and even the United States of America. So that's the position of the French government. He went on to say, we will not protect the Europeans unless we decide to have a true European army. Now, the truth is that actually that's quite a bad translation. Somebody kindly sent me through a better translation, because the French that he used there actually better translates to European military, because this is one of our key points. It's an important distinction. We've been saying this for quite some time. This is not about creating a new army. This is about unifying what already exists. All the EU military, including Britain's military, into, right across all the services, land-based, air-based, and sea-based. Okay, so that's an important distinction, as we'll come on to in a second. Now, at the weekend, of course, Vladimir Putin was attending the commemorations for Remembrance Day in Paris, alongside Donald Trump and Emmanuel Macron, and Mrs. Merkel was there as well. And he was asked about his view of what Macron had said about this. Well, this is what he had to say. He said, as for an alternative all-European military force, this idea is not a new one. President Macron simply brought it back to life, but it was one of the former presidents, Jacques Chirac, who talked to me about it before. So Putin saying that Chirac had discussed this with him in the past. Well, this is an important point. And if you head over to the UK Column website and have a look at the EU military unification page, on there, on the timeline, we discussed Chirac and how in 1998 he managed to get Blair to sign up to the Saint-Malo agreement. Now, the point is, as we'll come on to in a second, that this is something that has been going on for quite some time. And in fact, Putin mentioned this in his answer to the journalists as well. He said these ideas preceded Jacques Chirac as well. And indeed he did. And well, our members have got early access to the presentation that Alex Thompson gave last weekend in Totnes when we were covering these issues. That will be made generally available in the not too distant future. But the point that Alex was making was that this was a Franco-British initiative from the beginning for EU military unification, and it can be tracked right back to 1940. So what else did Putin have to say? He said, I think this process is in general positive from the standpoint of strengthening the multipolarity of the world. And I think this is one of the key points. Lots of people asking, what was Putin doing when he was suggesting this? This is the key point, isn't it, Patrick? A multipolarity in the world. He's quite keen to see the breakup of all power lying with the United States.
Now, this might be counterintuitive to the Russia-phobic mainstream media in Western Europe, but it makes perfect sense if you understand geopolitics and basic international relations theory. In terms of the balancing of power, Russia would welcome a European unified military force for the simple reason that would balance, with no need for a US-dominated presence militarily in Europe. And throughout the Cold War, Mike, the whole post-World War II United States-led unipolar strategy of preponderance, putting nuclear weapons on European soil, effectively occupying Germany militarily, occupying Britain militarily to a large extent, extending its deterrence, the United States' deterrence against the Soviet Union. Mike, when the Cold War finished, or when it was supposedly finished, when the collapse of the Soviet Union, that was supposed to initiate a sea change in this policy, this post-World War II policy, but it didn't. In fact, Mike, the Cold War accelerated in the West, even though it didn't in the East. So what Putin is saying there makes perfect sense. So he does see Europe, this potential for the balancing of power, and that, Mike, would usher in a new multipolar paradigm, international relations.
Well, okay. Now we have an exclusive on the UK column now. It literally came in 2 or 3 minutes before the programme began, so Patrick hasn't even had a chance to see this yet, but we've had a statement given to us by an ex-Royal Naval Admiral, and he is saying modern all-means hybrid warfare requires tight political and military command and control, and he emphasised the word tight. It has to be tight. He said Britain is losing this ability as well as NATO. So NATO is going to lose this ability as well. He said Russia has learned to master this, but he also said that EU military union does not offer that tight control. So that is a statement from an ex-Royal Naval Admiral, and I think that sums it up pretty well as well.
It sums up one way of looking at it, Mike, but I would say that I would add to what this ex-admiral said, that the reason Russia has mastered this is because Russia is actually under attack. Europe is not under attack. Russia is being threatened by NATO, by the Western powers, and not vice versa, if you really look at it from an objective point of view. So that's why they've been able to master that, and this is why Europe will not be able to master that, because it doesn't have the need to. So it's not an imperative for the West. The West's aggression towards Russia is rhetorical, yes, and also it's in terms of posturing and what NATO is doing on Russia's western border, Mike. So
well, indeed, that is a point that Putin made while he was giving that presentation.
Russia is not. Is Russia really a threat to Europe? Is Russia going to invade Europe? Has Russia made any moves in that direction? Has the rhetoric been as bombastic as the West has against Russia? So Russia sees a threat coming from the West. The West doesn't see a threat coming from Russia. In fact, Germany is quite prepared to go into partnership with Moscow on a number of fronts, including the delivery of a stable and affordable supply of natural gas. So there's joint interests between Europe and Russia. What the United States is doing is trying to break those quite obviously. So I think we need to also look at it from that point of view as well.
Absolutely. Now, we mentioned that Putin was at the commemorations in Paris with Trump. This tweet, well, tell us.
Well, this is actually from Emma Defano on Twitter. So this is a great snapshot here. This is the day after the torrential rainstorm, actually. And this is Donald Trump is giving a very enamorous look at Vladimir Putin. You can just see the top of Putin's head there. And there's Macron and his wife Brigitte there, and Angela Merkel just over the shoulder of Macron. And if you, so they're saying this is peak bromance, as it were. We go a little bit closer, and we can see this indicates, Mike, that actually there is intelligence sharing going on between Washington and Paris, because apparently Trump has given the contact details of his tanning salon to Emmanuel Macron. She's looking more orange than even the Donald is these days. So great cooperation between Washington and Paris.
Well, you mentioned the rainstorm, so let's just have a look at that, because this was the previous day. Well, I didn't see too many Western leaders. In fact, Donald Trump didn't want to go out in the rain.
He canceled his engagements because of weather, and look at this. That's Vladimir Putin, the Russian president, taking torrential rain for minutes there. He saw the soldiers were doing it, so why don't I do it as well? That speaks volumes, that clip right there. Yeah. And it really, Donald Trump really bottled it in that respect. And then what happened after, Justin Trudeau was able to take the mickey out of Trump for not being able to brave the rain. So it wasn't a good optics in terms of Donald Trump wanting to project his, I guess, alpha dog status on the international stage. Putin outclassed them all.
As usual. Okay, now let's come back to the UK. What's going on with Theresa May?
Well, this is according to the Guardian newspaper. Apparently, something was leaked, the details of a upcoming speech at Mansion House. So Theresa May, this is allegedly leaked here, together with our allies in response to the Salisbury attacks. We coordinated the largest ever collective expulsion of Russian intelligence officers, allegedly, fundamentally degrading Russia's intelligence capability for years to come. And our law enforcement agencies, through painstaking investigations and cooperations with our allies, produced irrefutable evidence that enables our Crown prosecution to bring charges against those responsible, and that's the key word there, is irrefutable evidence. Now, I'm not sure if we're talking about the same cases, but this is what is supposedly coming up in this upcoming speech.
Well, I'm just wondering, is she on some kind of mind-altering substance, which you know, she sees the world in such a different way, because she clearly feels that she has presented some evidence at some point on some things. I'm yet to see any.
She is under a mind-altering duress, and it's called political survival, Mike.
Right. Okay. Well, it continued actually, because what else did she say? Here we have, in these actions, we've seen the impact of international unity and a collective response to these threats. We have shown that while the challenge is real, so is the collective resolve of like-minded partners to defend our values, our democracies, and our people. I go back to the previous comment about mind-altering substances.
Well, and again, the key words here, Mike, are collective response. And so this alludes to what you've been talking about for months. That is the rapid reaction mechanism. And here's our rabbit again.
Our Alice in Wonderland rabbit.
That's right. This is from the Mad Hatter's Tea Party. And it's only fitting, Mike, because this is absolutely insane. Talk about Lewis Carroll and mind-altering substances. Alice in Wonderland. May's caught herself in here, tied in knots of all these different narratives, subplots, and wonderful fictional spy schemes.
Yes.
Amazing.
Well, speaking of fictional schemes, let's head over to Saudi Arabia, because Jeremy Hunt, the Foreign Secretary, is over there, apparently to push for an end to Yemen bloodshed. He says that he's there today. He said he's going to meet King Salman of Saudi Arabia, Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, of course, and several other members of the government. He's seeking to build support amongst international and particularly regional partners for new action in the United Nations Security Council to bolster the UN-led peace process in Yemen, following his meeting with UN Special Envoy for Yemen, Martin Griffiths, a few weeks ago. Apparently this will be the first, he will be the first UK visitor to visit Saudi Arabia since the murder of Jamal Khashoggi. So we'll be bringing that issue up as well. And he's going to use his meetings to make clear the importance of Saudi Arabia cooperating with Turkey to conduct a full and credible investigation into Mr. Khashoggi's death. So that's what's going on. Let's see what Jeremy Hunt had to say. The human cost of war in Yemen is incalculable. With millions displaced, famine and disease rife, and years of bloodshed, the only solution is now a political decision to sell Saudi Arabia many more arms. Now, of course, he didn't really say that. What he said was that Britain has a unique position, both as penholder at the UN Security Council and as a key influencer in the region. So today he's travelling to the Gulf to demand that all sides commit to the peace process, that they set aside arms and pursue peace. But Patrick, frankly, my version of what he said is much closer to the truth.
Mm-hmm. Do you really think that Britain's going to withhold billions of pounds in arms contracts to Saudi Arabia, who's willing to pay up front? Do you really think that's going to happen?
I don't think that's going to happen.
I think we're going to see a lot of rhetoric like this and a lot of wishy-washy back and forth, nice little PR holding patterns. But at the end of the day, Mike, that money's going to clear. Those transactions and invoices are going to be settled.
Okay, well, staying with the Middle East, then SWIFT and Iran. Now, SWIFT is the payment processing system, and there have been threats in the past, Patrick, that SWIFT would be, or the ability to interact with SWIFT would be removed from Russia and other countries. But is SWIFT seriously suggesting that they're going to stop, or they're going to remove Iran from the ability to take part in the international financial system?
Yes, they are. And why this is very serious is because in the past, sanctions being done via the U.S. Treasury with banking institutions, being able to stop banks from interacting with countries or with other banks in those countries. We're talking about Iran here, but they haven't gone so far as to ban them from the SWIFT interbank payment messaging system. And this is for clearing transactions around the world. This is very serious. SWIFT has always been, as they're meant to be a neutral, not-for-profit organization, they're supposed to be above politics, and this is so countries have a right to trade, have a right to do transactions across borders for essential goods. Now, this is a dangerous precedent, and this is basically an extension of sanctions.
So this is sanctions, but quite a serious extension of sanctions.
Yes, it is. And here's the CEO stated its decision was regrettable, but that the step was taken in the interests of the stability and integrity of the wider global financial system. Basically, this is the CEO of SWIFT, Gottfried Leibrandt. He's basically caved in to U.S. pressure. That's what's happened. So this statement is a cowardly statement. They've always been able to hold off this level of aggression by the United States, but clearly the United States threatened sanctions against SWIFT itself last week, or this hint was dropped by U.S. officials.
So, was it a bit stronger than a hint, perhaps?
It was more than a hint, it was a threat. So they've caved in, basically. With the danger here and what Gottfried Leibrandt has done, besides set his career up for a cushy position with some other bigger organization after he leaves SWIFT now, he'll be set up for life with a major bank or the IMF or something. But what he's done here is basically SWIFT is no longer neutral. And now they can do the same to Russia, and they will. Now the precedent has been set. Very dangerous.
Okay, well, sticking with very dangerous things, earlier in the year, I think this was February, the US produced its nuclear posture review report. Well, they were talking about increasing the role of nuclear weapons in geopolitical strategy, particularly with respect to Russia and China. Well, that view has now been echoed in fact, more than one article. It's a whole section in the latest issue of Foreign Affairs. If you want peace, prepare for nuclear war is the message. And this is an article written by Elbridge Colby, who's the son of the late former CIA director William Colby. The article, as I say, called "If You Want Peace, Prepare for Nuclear War, a Strategy for the New Great Power Rivalry." And he writes that the US needs to be ready to carry out limited nuclear operations. Well, the Russians haven't taken this very well. Maria Zakharova here, in her briefing at the end of last week, she gives these weekly briefings, really said that put it in the context of the US intention to withdraw from the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty, the INF Treaty. She said it's demonstrating a dangerous trend, taking the latest statements from Colby and the previous statements from the US document from earlier in the year. She said that the language she used was extremely alarming, Patrick, and I have to say I find it quite alarming that she would use language like that. So the Russians clearly concerned about this. She said Mr. Colby's is not just call for building up the US nuclear capabilities, but also to prepare to conduct limited nuclear operations. We wonder where these limited nuclear operations could be waged, on which continent will, or rather could, this strategy be applied. It is notable that this is not a private opinion of a retired military man. Similar ideas can be found in the updated US Nuclear Posture Review, which was published early in February 2018. Moreover, Washington has announced its plans to create nuclear charges and delivery vehicles for use within the framework of this strategy. Voices have been getting louder in the United States that seek to increase the role of nuclear weapons and expand the possibilities of US nuclear arsenal. And she absolutely stated that this was on the basis of a mythical Russian threat. And she said that judging by this, US analysts have started seriously considering the concept of a limited nuclear war, and apparently some of them have thought this over and assessed that the US and its allies would be able to gain a victory in it. She wasn't mincing her words, Patrick, so I'm interested to know what you think about this.
I can't speak for the Russian spokesperson, but I can speak for the United States. The United States is not prepared for any kind of nuclear exchange. The country is not prepared, society is not prepared. U.S. is not even willing to make any sacrifices in the fight against ISIS, real sacrifices. They're flying around thousands of sorties. They're allowing ISIS to run around and do what they like in Syria and Iraq. In fact, they're almost managing them you could say. They can't even deal with a threat as flimsy and as haphazard as ISIS. Do you really think they're prepared for a nuclear conflagration against another power? Of course they're not. But the rhetoric, sure, Mike, has brought people in think tanks in Washington to puff their chests out and believe that they are somehow prepared and they can actually win something like this. Russia's prepared, Mike. They've already made statements previously to that effect that if the United States wants a world order without Russia in it, then Russia's not prepared to live in that sort of a world. Well, there's no other choice, really. So, but at the end of the day, if the U.S. is to, what everyone wants to know, Mike, is if the U.S. is going to start via a false flag or some sort of, fake pretext to start some kind of a nuclear exchange to use tactical nuclear weapons, where are they going to use them first? And of course, Mike, the most logical answer to that is going to be somewhere on the Eurasian landmass.
Iran?
Could be, Mike. It could be, or somewhere in the Eurasian landmass, because the United States would like nothing more in its geopolitical grand strategy machinations to somehow interrupt the Belt and Road project, for instance. This is coming online, connecting the Far East to Europe. This is something the United States would like to disrupt. And to maybe put the brakes on, and certainly any sort of radioactive incident in Eurasia would really fit the bill nicely with regards to that. So, in terms of grand strategy, in terms of really wargaming out this type of scenario, you have to be realistic. What does Russia have to gain from nuclear escalation? Nothing. What does the United States have to gain? Well, they have to retain their current unipolar hegemonic position globally, because they're losing it for the very multipolar reasons which we illustrated earlier in this program.
Okay, now the BBC are up to their tricks, Patrick. They have decided that they're going to fight back against disinformation, and so they've launched the Beyond Fake News Project. This is called the Beyond Fake News Project, and we heard some of this in the car on the way in this morning on Radio 4's Today programme, because they've decided to launch this. They're saying that this is Press Gazette here saying that the BBC has launched their Beyond Fake News project with a season of programming to fight back against disinformation. The BBC will fight back against disinformation globally with a special season of programming and it's a series of documentaries, special reports, and features across its TV, radio, and online networks in Europe, the Americas, Africa, India, Asia, and the Pacific region as well. And in the picture there, we can just about see Jamie Angus, who's the director of BBC World Service Group, who said that he wanted to fulfill a pledge made earlier this year to move beyond just talking about global fake news threat and to take concrete steps to address it. So content from the BBC's international journalists will include a documentary about how WhatsApp has turned an Indian village into a lynch mob. It reports on Russia's disinformation campaign, and also how Facebook is being used to spread false information in the Philippines. So this is all good stuff. And they're also going to host a debate with Facebook, Twitter, and Google about their role in stemming the spread of fake news. So I'm really impressed by all this. Well, today they launched their Beyond Fake News program, and one of the first things that they decided to cover was this one, Patrick, Russian disinformation and the Lab of Death. And of course, this is an expose of the fake news of a bioweapons lab in Georgia called the Lugar Center. Now, what was really interesting about this report is that it is absolutely full of fake news itself. First of all, it's on the basis, they say, that this is Russian disinformation, that the report that this is based on, they say, was released by Russia in autumn 2018, so they're citing this Russia's information noise, the Lab of Death. This is the rhetoric that they're using. Of course, it wasn't autumn 2018, was it?
No.
And it wasn't Russia either.
That broke the story.
The story, because actually it was 21st Century Wire that broke the story.
Well, more specifically, it was the Bulgarian journalist Dilyana Gaetaniera, and of course we syndicated her work on this story, and it's quite in-depth, the research that she put together. Now, mind you, Mike, this is January of 2018. This is almost a year ago. So the BBC are nearly a year behind in their evaluation of where the source of the story came. Of course, Diliana did a number of follow-ups to that article. All of her research is validated. It's all official documents from the United States, from the Center of Disease Control, from the various bioweapons and research facilities and branches of the U.S. military, Mike. So it's all very well documented, including patents for the things that were mentioned in the BBC reports. And also Diliana went on location, Mike, in Georgia, and was harassed and chased off site by this, what the BBC are calling a public health center in Tbilisi. But it's not, Mike. It's actually it's a U.S. military-run facility, part of a bigger global Pentagon-funded bioweapons research or biological research, officially, a chain of centers right across the former Soviet republics, Mike.
The BBC claimed that this lab was created or set up in order to secure any biological agents that were left behind after the fall of the Soviet Union. But this is complete nonsense for many of the reasons that are explained in Diliana's report, so I'm not going to go into it now. But the key point for me here, Patrick, was that what the BBC is attempting to do is to suggest that this report and others originated with the Russian government and that they were pushed out by the Russian government, where they were taken up by alternative media sources who didn't really check their facts terribly well and just echoed what the Russian government was saying. But the truth is here that the reports and other reports, similar types of reports, are originating with alternative media in the West who are doing the job that the mainstream media should do. The Russian government is discovering these stories, and that they are actually taking these stories up and commenting on them. So here we've got 9 months from the launch of this story to the point that the Russians are commenting on it. Mm-hmm. This is not originated with Russia, and the BBC is simply lying to suggest that it is.
No, this report really originated with an independent Bulgarian investigative journalist, but they don't want to feature her because the details that she brought up in her report, Mike, raise a whole set of other questions, like why are the employees of the Luga Center given diplomatic immunity, including, Mike, corporate contractors afforded diplomatic immunity by the U.S. Embassy. Yeah. So why? Why would that be? So again, those are difficult questions, Mike, to answer. So it's no surprise that the BBC just completely avoided them and went for the tabloid narrative, which is that it's Russian disinformation. Let me also say, Mike, the mainstream media have done the exact same thing with the white helmets. They've accused the Russians of concocting a white helmet campaign or a conspiracy against the so-called NGO of the white helmets in Syria, which have turned out by all forensic evidence to be linked to Al-Qaeda terrorist affiliates in Syria, Mike. So they're accusing the Russians of concocting that, but in fact, the first people to cover that story are alternative media. And 21st Century Wire, Vanessa Beeley has done a tremendous amount of work long before the Russians or RT or any Russian network even touched or picked up the story, Mike. Yeah. So again, they're doing, as you say, Mike, they're trying to reverse the timeline and how stories are breaking. It's alternative media doing the job that the mainstream media in the West are not doing no longer. And then what they do is when Russian media finally pick it up, as you said, then they sort of blame everything on Russia and then accuse alternative media of basically amplifying or parroting Russian disinformation or Russian propaganda. The entire premise of the BBC's Beyond Fake News is completely disingenuous. It's beyond disingenuous. It's so dishonest intellectually and so full of holes. It's like a giant block of Swiss cheese, Mike. But what's really the worst thing about it is it's pure propaganda, basically. But they view this as counter-propaganda because according to their own twisted narrative, Russia is the source of all propaganda and discord in the West, as if we never argued with each other or no one's ever challenged the government in the history of the West. It's all because of Russia, and that they are rightly launching counter-propaganda, counter-disinformation operations to sort of right the course of the information sphere. So it is amazing, Mike. Eric Blair would be, I don't know, he would be dizzy right now.
Yeah.
He would be dizzy because the BBC has become something completely different even from when he was working there.
Yes, indeed. Right. Let's end with some comedy, Patrick, sorry. She's not. She couldn't. She won't.
Well, Hillary, as according to Clinton aide and former pollster, Hillary Clinton will run again in 2020. And by the way, we checked the bookies' odds on this. Not bad. You can sort of put a score down right now and maybe win about 150 quid come 2020. But Hillary's going to, if she gets a nomination. So I'm with her, redux. But we have to be careful, Mike, because this could very easily go south. That's the danger here. And I would say this announcement, the Trump camp is probably pretty happy to hear this. If that's Donald Trump's opponent in 2020, yeah, they might be cracking champagne balls early. But then again, maybe not. Maybe Trump will crash and burn before 20. We don't know.
Yeah.
But it is certainly going to be fun.
Yes.
If that happened, it will be exciting and it will get people involved in politics again, Mike, and that's what it's all about.
Yeah. Okay. We will leave it there. Thank you very much for joining us today. Thank you for your time today, Patrick. Fantastic
You
stuff.
see the weather, Mike. It's the rain's pouring behind
Yeah, it
us.
is. Yeah.
There's a massive storm here in Plymouth.
Yeah.
So we're just like Putin in France. We're braving the torrential rains down here on the south coast.
Yeah. We will be back as usual at 1 p.m. on Wednesday. We will see you then. Bye-bye.